You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB.
View on the Black Caps from outside the camp as well. I know Piney spoke to Dylan Cleaver from The Bounce. You can find his writing on Substack, New Zealand cricket writer, sports writer. I know he spoke to him at the start of the tournament, so we thought, end of the tournament, let's get Dylan Cleaver's assessment on how it all went for the Black Caps, and he joins us now on News Talk ZB. Dylan, thanks for your time.
No worries at all, Elliott. Looking forward to it.
How would you look back at this Black Caps campaign? Was it one of overachievement in the end?
Slightly, I would say. I think you'd have to be pretty content as a New Zealand cricket fan. If you were given the scenario before a World Cup in India that the team was going to make the semi-finals and score 330-odd against India in that semi-final, you would have taken it, I would say, in a heartbeat. Obviously, there were some disappointing aspects to it, but I think in general, the positive outweighed the negative.
I saw a column on Cricket Info this morning which said that the campaign had a bit of 2015 about it, a bit of 2019 about it, and ultimately it ended up, not matching either of those tournaments. Is that a fair assumption? A fair view on it?
Yeah, I would say 2015 stands alone as a kind of watershed moment for New Zealand cricket. I wouldn't necessarily compare it to 2015. I think it was very similar. In fact, uncannily similar to 2019. The only difference, obviously, being that in 2019, that team not only reversed its way into the semi-finals, but it also beat India in the semi-finals. But there was something similar about it, getting wins on the board early, playing very well against the teams you should play very well against, perhaps not so well against the other contenders. But yeah, as I said, the difference is that in 2019, they came up against an Indian team in the semi-finals who wobbled. In 2023, they came up against an Indian side in the semi-finals that is quite simply on home turf, a behemoth, a juggernaut, and it was going to take something absolutely spectacular to stop them. And they gave it a fair crack, but didn't quite get there.
I was reading your column yesterday, and you mentioned that the Black Caps seam attack and looked every one of its years. Southee, Bolt over 30 now. Bolt not having played much white ball cricket for New Zealand in recent times. Southee has been on the outer really in one day cricket for a while. But was the seam attack the Achilles heel of the Black Caps over this campaign?
Yeah, it was, and that was disappointing in some ways because when you looked at this team before the World Cup, you kind of thought, well, we're not quite sure how the batters are going to go in subcontinent conditions, but that's still a very strong seam attack. With the new ball, they'll still get to swing around a bit, and if we can knock the top off a few batting orders, they're a live chance here. But the seamers were not helped by the Matt Henry going home hurt early. I mean, he's been New Zealand's best ODI bowler for a couple of years now. He's been exceptional. That hurt. If you look at the bowling attack during this World Cup, they averaged 37.5 runs per wicket, which is not going to get the job done a heck of a lot of times against good teams. And they also went for, on average, 5.91 runs per over, which is easily their worst return in a World Cup campaign. So that was the Achilles heel. Southee was kind of a fringe candidate to make the 11, but obviously he was thrust into it once Henry went home. His tools aren't really quite suited for limited overs cricket in the subcontinent.
Just on Tim Southee in particular, Dylan, we haven't seen a lot of him in one-day cricket, as I mentioned before. Is his time now perhaps over in 50-over cricket for New Zealand? Yeah,
that's a really good question. If there's one thing I've got a hell of a lot of admiration for Tim Southee for, it is he always puts his hand up, to play, and he always puts his hand up to bowl at the worst possible times. I don't actually think that his skill set suits that now. And I think he's a senior leader in the team. He's still a guy all the young guys look up to, but I think bowling, certainly his days of bowling at the death need to be over sooner rather than later. Whether there's still a place for him in the ODI side, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's any compelling candidates underneath that can knock him out just yet. But you got to remember, he was a fringe player. He didn't play a heck of a lot in 2019, and he didn't play a heck of a lot while Matt Henry was available in this tournament. So I think he'll still be putting his hand up to play, but there needs to be a period of renewal in that bowling attack. And look, he may be the one that Gary Stead has to have a quiet word with.
One of the key points in your latest column on the bounce was that there's a lot of players in the squad that won't be back in 2027, or probably won't be back in 2027, just age-wise and playing-wise. This is probably the end of a certain generation of one-day cricketers for New Zealand, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. This was one of the oldest squads at the World Cup, if not the oldest squad. There is a core of players in that team who have served New Zealand cricket magnificently. We are talking about your Southies, your Bolts, Lockie Ferguson, Tom Latham, even Kane Williamson. I'm not sure whether he will have. There's a lot of tread worn off his tyres already. 300 and something international games across all formats. With one-day cricket's future looking a little tenuous, you do wonder if some of those veteran players will look to trim their calendars a little bit, and it would seem to me that one-day cricket is probably the obvious one to maybe drop from their portfolio.
Dylan, do we have players coming through? I mean, you suppose you look at Rachin Ravindra, who had a very, very good tournament, still very, very young himself. Do we have young players coming through? And I suppose with an eye to replenishing some of those bowling stocks that may not be around in the quicks in a few years' time.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about the bowling stocks, which is not. It's a very un-New Zealand thing, really. It's normally the batting stocks you worry about. Look, we're never going to have produced the kind of depth that in England and Australia and India can. It's just a pure numbers game. So New Zealand has to develop their limited talent very carefully and very well. And it's something they've done exceptionally over the past 10 years. And you mentioned Rachin Ravindra, who blew me away. I knew he was a good player. I didn't realise that he was a potential superstar of the world game. Now, that's a guy that you've now got for at least a decade. If his form holds, and there's nothing to suggest it won't, you've got that guy who can play for probably a decade across all formats. He's that good. So you only really need a couple of complementing pieces, don't you? And to use your resources carefully, to keep those experienced guys in the fold. There's a kid at Wellington who I'm really excited about his talent, Mohammed Abbas. He's still loose. He still tries to play a shot of ball, but he is an exceptional talent. There is Adi Ashok, who bowls leg spin up at Auckland, who also got high hopes for. I hope he develops his red ball game before his white ball game. But if you're a young cricketer these days and you're looking at a certain tournament at India, perhaps white ball skills take precedence. There's a Dean Foxcroft, South African-born player in his mid-20s at Otago. He probably needs to score heavier, but his raw talent is pretty exceptional. Look, I'm going to miss out players here, but there is enough of a sprinkling of talent through the New Zealand game to marshal the resources, keep your experienced guys in the fold. I mean, guys like Daryl Mitchell, Devon Conway, Will Young, they're already in their 30s, but they haven't played a heck of a lot of international cricket, certainly compared to your Williamson, Southies and Bolts. So they can probably play quite easily into their mid-30s. They've probably got another cycle in them, World Cup cycle in them, and they've probably got another half decade of all-format cricket if they're good enough to keep getting picked. So I don't think the future's bleak. In the past, you looked at New Zealand cricket in terms of cycles, and you'd have a good group of players come through, and they'd all go at the same time, and then we'd have a long fallow period. And I'm thinking kind of, early 90s was a disaster for New Zealand cricket. They're much smarter now. I don't think we're going to have those peaks and troughs. But then again, you get a legend like a Kane Williamson retiring, and, he's not going to play forever. And there will be a hole in your side, but I think they're much better at backfilling now.
Well, Dylan, appreciate your time. And the good news is it's only, 9-10 days until there's a test series to get underway, such as the way that cricket operates now.
Yeah, I love test cricket. Even if it is in Bangladesh and probably not the greatest time zone, I'll certainly be watching it.
Good man, Dylan. Appreciate your time with us here on News Talk ZB. Catch up soon.
Thanks, Elliott.
Dylan Cleaver joining us. You can find his writing on The Bounce. Just Google The Bounce Substack and you can view his writing. One of New Zealand's premier cricket writers on the game.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.